Good evening, Holliston. Welcome to the Select Board's meeting for Monday, April 12th, 2021. This evening we have an agenda that's described as short, but that's deceptive. So we will begin this evening with a report from a committee that we had formed to look at the stipends in Holliston. We last saw them a couple of months ago, and I understand they've been busy doing some work to revise some recommendations. So this evening we'll start with that committee, and welcome, is Joan with us? Hi, Joan, how are you tonight?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Good.
So I can't see that, I see Dan is on the call, Erica.
Yes.
I don't know if you're expecting anyone else, but feel free at this point to begin
Sure.
giving us an updated report on what you folks have been up to.
Sure, thank you. Is it okay if I put up a quick PowerPoint? I promise it is very concise.
We like that, and you just got a thumbs up from Chris Mayo, so go
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll share my screen, Chris.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So from the beginning. Okay. So I don't think last time, I think I just spoke to a memo. I've shared with you a memo which was just approved by the stipend committee. And here is the form of PowerPoint that will, if necessary, be ready for town meeting. This is the charter issued by the Holliston Select Board, which I don't need to read to you since it's from your meeting. There's a link there if you care to link to your meeting minutes. In benchmarking, we identified the universe and the peer group by using the governance committee +3. We added Hopkinton, Medfield, and Hanover. Those are the towns listed. There is, those highlighted are those that offer stipends. If you wanted to take a look at the demographic detail, I added the population and area in case you wanted to take a look at that, just to see where we stand versus our peers and why this universe makes sense. I did this because I am a data nerd. And I like to look at things in context. So this is just for your own edification. It doesn't really add to the findings at all, but I think it's all sort of interesting when we look at Holliston as compared to our peers. One of the things that I was very surprised, and having been in town government for as long as I have, that a debt as percent of budget, we are 67th percentile. It did not surprise me that our stabilization fund balance was very high, but our bond rating is not as high as it could be, and I believe that that's a result as the debt as percent of budget. Just my guess. I was also surprised that we are 88th percentile in state aid. So again, there's the source at the bottom if you wanted to link out. You don't have to trust me. You can look. So stipends in the peer universe, of the 18 towns, 55% of those towns offer a stipend, 45% do not. Here's the breakdown of who they offer them to. Self-explanatory. Here's the stipends in the full peer universe. So this is within those that offer. And if you take the numbers, because I think you have to look at it both ways. So in Holliston, we offer to the select and assessors, which is consistent with 27% of the towns in our identified peer universe. And this is the breakdown of what those numbers look like. We could not find statistical or even qualitative evidence of why towns offer stipends to these boards. The reasons vary greatly, and we could not get to a statistical answer. So this was just an interesting thing. Like if we're looking at, in listening to presentations of late, there's been a lot of emphasis on peer grouping, and the governance committee has talked about practices of other towns. So I just wanted to take a quick look at where we stood in our practice. We're similar to 27% in the entire universe. But as you can see, the amount we offer is really off. The board of select, thus our select board gets paid the least amount of any town that offers stipends to their select boards. And we offer almost 2x the amount that any town offers its board of assessors. This sort of goes to my earlier point that the it's very subjective. It's based on legacy and history, and every town has a story about how these came about and why they're still in place. We did send out a survey to the members of our committees that are offered a stipend. And we also sent an external survey to 18 towns to try to get at some of that information. And we had a very poor response rate on the external. So we didn't actually consider any of the results of that survey statistically significant. I'm happy to, I think in the past I've shared these results with you so you could look at the granular detail if you so chose. We have 6 members that are offered 3 select, 3 assessors. We got 2 from each board that responded. And it was asked by a member of the finance committee why we didn't survey the other boards, which I thought was a fair question. And we did it because they don't get a stipend. So for us, the evidence is there that they're willing to serve without a stipend because they are. These are qualitative findings. I do think it's important to understand that, particularly in Holliston, people who volunteer do so in the name of service. Every board is a working board. There is, there was a bullet point that I added and it apparently didn't make it in. But there are many boards in Holliston, other than the assessors, that meet during the work week. So for example, the planning board, not the planning board, the school committee, I served on it myself. I've never been to a budget subcommittee meeting at night, nor have I ever been to a policy meeting or a superintendent evaluation meeting at night. You need the superintendent and the business manager, and you have to meet them where they are during business hours. So looking at stipends in Holliston, here we are, the 2 boards that are offered. It's just worthy of note that no members of these boards currently utilizes the healthcare benefit option from the town. The Holliston Stipend Committee endeavored to find a data-driven answers to the questions posed by the charter. And we could not find a statistically driven, data-driven answer. So we have to look at other things. We believe that the offering of stipends is a function of legacy and not of differentiation, i.e., there is nothing so outstanding and special about the select board or the board of assessors as distinct from the other boards that warrant a stipend. It could be that members of the stipend of the board of assessors or the select board disagree with that statement. However, if you talked to every other member of every other board, I think they might disagree. So 27%, we already went over that. Okay, so here's where we came out. We came out on the side of equity. We came out saying that since we do believe that the stipends are a function of legacy and not differentiation, that it is appropriate to, oops, I don't know what just happened, but we are looking to, wow, okay, cease the practice of offering stipend to any elected or appointed boards and committees in Holliston, because if we're doing it for 2, we cannot find a reason why we would be doing it for all, and that is not a financial commitment we believe the taxpayers would be behind, nor that we would fiscally responsibly recommend that outcome. We do, however, believe that we have to maintain the current stipend offered to those office holders who ran with the understanding that there would be a stipend. So for example, all of you get your $50 through the current term. We also believe that those who filed papers and returned them, so for example, if Mr. Cronin were to be reelected, he would be entitled to 3 years of stipend of $50. Once the current term expires, no future stipend would be offered to future office holders. So that is where we came out. And I will entertain questions.
Thanks so much.
And Daniel Wynot and Erica Plunkett. All three of us are here to answer questions.
Sounds great, thanks. We'll start with Ben if he has any questions at all. Ben?
I think I just have a comment, and that is to thank you for putting this together. I know there were some changes from the previous iteration of this. There was a little more information that came forward, but I think that's that's why this is a process, and so I appreciate the work that you've done to put this together, Joan, you and your committee.
Thank you.
Excuse
me, Ben, if I may interrupt you, I skipped sort of an important detail because my mind was on town meeting and not the PowerPoint for you all. And I apologize for interrupting, Ben. What forced us, made the committee go back and look at this again and revisit it and take up your time twice is that we based it on some erroneous information that I gained from an interview. It was not from the moderator. I mean, it wasn't not from the assessor who gave me that information. It was another source. And in our initial recommendation, we said that if the town wanted to justify a stipend to the Board of Assessors, we would use the 1 week in residence at UMass for that. As it turns out, that for the last 2 or 3 years has been offered in an online format, and it is not that much different than training that you need to be on the finance committee or the school committee or the select board. So there was the differentiation there sort of went away. And I took this opportunity to go back, and I looked up all of the data that we had presented originally and affirmed all of the data. And in so doing, I did catch an error or two. It didn't change the numbers terrifically, but if there was a stipend, and I dug a little deeper, and then I realized that those people were not actually, they were elected, but they are certified assessors, so they were getting paid like $13,000 a year. They're getting paid like a contractor would. And for the rest of the, so now all the data that we have reaffirmed and presented is accurate. Sorry to interrupt, Ben.
Okay. I think my only comment is that there's training to be on the select board. I didn't know about that. I thought it was
if there isn't, that's no, there is. I mean, there is.
Certification. You got to pass the test and get certified by the state.
Board of Assessors.
For Board of Assessors. I'm talking about the select board.
Oh.
Well, you came on during a pandemic, so things were a little different, but I went to training.
But I was just making a glib comment. But I just wanted to say thank you, Joan, for what you've put together, and I appreciate that the circumstances changed, and I think it takes a good sort to be able to say, I made an error and I'm going to go fix it. So thank you for having the wherewithal to do so. So I appreciate it, and thanks for your hard work and for your committee for volunteering to do this work and to do this research to put this together. So thank you.
Thank you. To err is human, to forgive divine.
Indeed.
Appreciate it.
2 quick questions. I'm just curious on the vote, because I imagine it was a difficult. Not difficult, but it was not necessarily the intended thing to go back and revisit. So the first recommendation of Feb 8th, was it a 5-0 vote? And then was it the same on the second recommendation today?
Yes, it was 5-0 both times. And the first time we didn't make us a recommendation. We said, this is really so subjective that we have to put it to to town meeting, to the taxpayers. But we did say, there is this thing out there. So if there was a strong feeling by anybody who wanted to make a case for the assessors getting this stipend, we could point to a reason and a calculation that could get you there. And we have since learned that that differentiation wasn't there. So since that differentiating factor disappeared, so to speak, or wasn't in existence, then we felt comfortable with making a recommendation that the offering one board and not others is an inequitable practice.
Okay, and then I don't.
Unanimous both times, yes.
Thank you. Okay, and then it doesn't look like it, and perhaps this is outside the scope of your committee's work. Did you consider the impact on health insurance? Was that something you guys ever discussed? Especially with the second recommendation.
It was, we talked about it, but no members in Holliston currently take advantage of it. And as I said before, it was very difficult to get to motivation for volunteerism. And motivation for volunteerism that was too granular to get at in a data-driven way.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So, Joan, I don't have any questions. You
okay.
answered the question I was going to ask, which is what changed since the last time we started. So appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I think at this point we want to thank you very much for your submittal. I will ask anybody associated with the Zoom call if they've got any questions associated with the updated, revised stipend committee report to the select board. Hearing none. Okay. That'll be it for tonight. Joan, thanks so much. We appreciate your time. Dan.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me come back.
No, always good to see you folks. Thanks again for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to an update from our fire chief on the coronavirus community update. Good evening, Chief.
We have a public hearing at 7:30, so we may have to kick you to the curb and bring you back.
I'm happy to return.
Forewarning.
Thank you. So, since last week, we have an additional 14 cases. There are no new fatalities reported. Those 14 additional cases are spread out over 24 addresses, several more at single-family homes, one additional cluster at a single-family home, and we're starting to see more, once again, at multifamily dwellings. And those 14 new cases, one came in last Tuesday, and then 13 were reported today. So there was a bit of a spread between when we got that information. So not much change on the graph. We continue to go up. We haven't seen any additional recoveries reported to us since last week. In terms of the positivity, for the second week in a row, our positivity was lower than the state. We are now 11 weeks that we have been in the yellow, and we hope to continue to stay below the state. We hope to continue to be in yellow or better.
Again, Mike, real quick, the next stage down is gray, is that correct?
Green, then gray.
Green. Okay. How does one get to green?
One gets to green by number of cases and positivity. It's a combined. Up until November, it was just one factor, but now they look at the two. So we need to have fewer cases, and also our positivity needs to be lower for us to be able to get to the green.
Thank you.
Sure. Looking at the map around us, again, you will note that the Commonwealth continues to get more red. Last week there were 55 communities. This week there are 77. I had mentioned last week the surge on Cape Cod and the variant of concern. The communities around us, Sherburne's in the gray still, Framingham, now Hopedale, Milford and Southborough are in the red, and the other communities around us that we sort of benchmark against are also in the yellow as we are. Looking at positivity, we do see a little bit of good news there as the trend starts to go a little bit down. But looking at hospitalizations, as we've mentioned before, hospitalizations next. is a late indicator, so the fact that the positivity was starting to ebb down while hospitalizations are still going up, there's a little bit of a lag there. In terms of where we are on the who is eligible for vaccine, again, there was a new set of folks that were eligible last Monday, and next week starts phase 3 when other individuals ages 16 and older will be eligible. In terms of vaccinations here for Holliston residents, we're very pleased to report that right now 46% of our community is at least partially vaccinated. And again, my thanks to the great work of the volunteers and the staff at the Council on Aging and other vaccine angels in the community. Currently, 95% of individuals 65 to 74 have at least one shot, and 99% of individuals 75 and older in Holliston have received at least one shot. So that is definitely something for us to celebrate. And 25.8% of our community is fully vaccinated. And again, the state considers fully vaccinated to have received 2 shots of Moderna, 2 shots of Pfizer, or the 1 shot of Johnson & Johnson. In terms of things to be watching for, we do know that Pfizer has sought an additional emergency use authorization for 12 to 15-year-olds. Right now, they are approved for 16 and up. The other ones are the Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson are approved for 18 and older. Pfizer currently is 16 and up, but they are seeking authorization for 12 to 15-year-olds, which would expand the number of our students that could be eligible in the future. And then the other good news is that the regional collaborative that we are a part of is receiving an allotment of 1,500 doses of Moderna this week. They are running 3 5-hour clinics on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. this week, which will be at the DoubleTree Hotel in Westboro. And if you are pre-registered on the state site for signing up for vaccination, you can check to see if you can sign up. You would do the search. It comes up as Northborough DoubleTree, but then when you look at the address, it indicates that DoubleTree is located in Westboro. But Northborough is the lead health agency for the regional collaborative. So very exciting that after many weeks of waiting, we are finally starting to see some doses coming to our regional collaborative. And with that, I will pause to see if there are any questions.
Mr. Sparrow.
I just have one. So the previous slide you showed like a demographic breakdown of the vaccine, like some of the people.
Yes.
Is there any other additional breakdown of who's gotten the vaccine that you have available?
Yes, I see it's in 0 to 19, which is kind of awkward because right now, depending on, so the age bands for vaccination data are 0 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 49, 50 to 64, 65 to 74, and 75 and older.
Okay. And so there's, I'm assuming there's probably some decent rates in some of these other.
Not as quite as high because some of them, unless they had multiple comorbidities, really weren't as eligible up until recently. But I do track it on a weekly basis, so I continue to see that trending. But I can provide those.
It's a curiosity. It's not a necessity. So,
sure.
But thank you.
Yeah. I've been highlighting the 65 and older because it was one of our high-risk populations that we were focused on with a lot of our efforts.
We might want to move more towards that just to show, because as phase 3 takes hold and everybody can get
And again, a reminder to anybody who has pre-registered, as we've encouraged folks to, it will take several weeks for you to get an appointment. Just because you become eligible on April 19th, it may be a couple weeks, even with more regional sites as well as mass vax sites in Natick Mall, at the Gillette Stadium. It still could be a couple weeks before they're able to get an appointment.
Take a look at the draw.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Tina.
Previously, you put up a slide that had the average age of a hospitalized individual.
Yes.
Has that changed? It was 63 years old. That was like 2 or maybe 3 weeks ago. Do you know if that's changed significantly?
Not statistically significant.
All right, that's my only question. Thank you.
Chief, I also have just one question. For weeks as we interact with you on the Coronavirus Community Update Week, we learn about how Department of Public Health is tracking the positivity rates. In previous conversations, we've asked about variants, whether or not they're tracking that. The answer is generally no. But in this case, my question is there any indication from public health that any of the positivity rate people might have already been vaccinated? Are we learning anything about the efficacy of these vaccines and whether or not they're holding back the positivity or, in some cases, those becoming infected? Anything like that?
Sure. They are tracking breakthrough cases, and a breakthrough case is defined as where the individual had one or more in the series and continued to get the symptoms of the disease. Very, very few cases, but they are aware of that and they're tracking that. And if the local Board of Health or whoever is doing surveillance and case monitoring, in speaking to the individual who gets the positive test result, they will question them, and if they had gotten a vaccine, they will enter that, and that is tracked separately.
All right, so for the most part, DPH would know that.
Yes.
It's not going to be made known to the local though.
Not unless they were doing the active case management.
Fair enough. Any questions from those on our Zoom call for Chief Cassidy and the coronavirus community updates? Hearing none, we'll move on to the CARES Act programmatic
Excellent.
update.
Very quickly, just one additional expense posted to Munis since last week, and that was for salary. So we continue to track both with the line chart as well as the pie chart. I have 3 requests for you this evening, so I will do my best to get through those in the next 4.5 minutes before your scheduled hearing. First one is from facilities. It's $10,970 for the installation of 2 bottle filling stations. These will, one will be a full replacement, the other will be an addition to an existing water fountain. And this falls under the social distancing measures, allowable use under CARES of minor building modifications.
Questions on that, Beth? No. Tina?
Happy to see it's bottle filling.
Yes. So there was some concern with one of the locations that it could have potentially contributed to some spread at one point. So they just want to make sure that in the future they avoid that potential.
Very well. I will entertain a motion to approve $10,970 for the bottle filling stations at Town Hall and the police station.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Then carries.
Excellent, thank you. The second one comes from the police department, and this was an anticipated cost that has been being tracked on our projections for the CARES spending, and this is $1,435 for additional crossing guard hours, which is related to the extended hours due to the additional traffic as people have not been riding the bus.
Any questions on that, Ben?
Yeah, actually, so on the snapshot that we have for the additional projections, this has the crossing guard at 2205.
Yes, that was for 3 individuals.
So we're talking about
2.
2. Got it. Okay.
Tina?
None, thank you. No questions?
Chief, again, does this carry the expense through to June 30th?
Yes, or through the end of the school year.
Effectively, yep. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the $1,435 cost for additional crossing guard hours.
I'll make that motion.
Tina?
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Then carries.
Excellent. And the last one. Thank you. Thank you to our technology director who is managing multiple meetings over my shoulder and having to manage multiple Zoom accounts currently. The last one comes as it supports the regional collaborative vaccination site. Each of the towns had multiple ways to contribute to the successful operations, and each community was asked to bear the cost of a clerical individual. And so the position was posted in multiple towns. They received approximately 50 applicants for the temporary clerical help position. They screened the candidates. They narrowed it down to 28 in the pool, and then several communities started making offers. And so as our contribution, it would be the request that for 16 weeks, which would be from when we open this week until the end of July, that we would offer up a temporary clerical position. This is 100% FEMA eligible for reimbursement as a vaccine administration cost. So although we would bear the cost up front, it's 100% eligible, and it is non-benefits eligible as well.
Any questions on that? Oh, yeah.
Are are other towns using their CARES money to pay for their clerical staff? Okay.
Yes, and that's, the reason that they did this is because one of the communities in the regional collaborative had to bear the upfront cost of renting the hotel for the 4 months. And for an equity reason, they decided that, it would be helpful if each community could contribute a, part-time clerical.
And last question real quick, we're hiring an additional staff member, we're not pulling an existing clerical out of town hall?
Correct.
Clerical position, okay, thank you.
They pre-screened a number of them so that we were able to sort of choose, and each community has grabbed a few, and this is so we can initiate ours.
Got it.
They go live this week.
All right. I have no questions, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the $16,000 cost of temporary clerical help associated with the regional collaborative vaccine site.
I will make that motion.
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That's carried.
Great, thank you. And very, quickly wrapping up, as it pertains to ARPA, we still don't have any additional guidance with regards to, spending. We continue to hone in on the anticipated amount that the town would be receiving through 2024, as well as, what the school would be seeing in their ESSER round 3. But, we still don't have the guidance from Treasury or ANF on allowable uses. So when I know something, you'll know something.
You said 2024, I think you meant up to 2024.
Yes. I mean, it
was
would
over
expire.
several years.
Yeah, it would expire at,
But when it's available, it'll be available relatively soon.
half of it would be available initially, and then
So that happens.
18 months later, the second half would be available.
Great.
John, real quick question, I'm sorry.
Please, go ahead.
One more, will we know how many Holliston residents are vaccinated at the DoubleTree in Westboro? When the 4 months are over, as you described, whatever the time period is for that back site to be open for the region, will we end up with data telling us how many Holliston residents are vaccinated at that site?
It's an excellent question. I'm not sure. I assume that they will probably be able to generate some reports because they have to report into the state, which is what I get the vaccination numbers from. And the other thing to remember is one of the purposes of us participating in this regional collaborative was not just for town residents, but also for town employees. So there may be some that we may not capture in a report that says, give us all the 01746 zip code.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Any questions for Chief Cassidy on the Zoom call regarding CARES Act programmatic updates? Hearing none. Chief, thanks again for the update.
Thank you.
This portion of our agenda, we will now, jump to the public notice on Summit Point Drive regarding a road acceptance. So I'll ask the clerk to read the notice of hearing.
Okay. Do you have that? If you don't, I have it.
The one that's 5 pages long.
Yeah, I got it.
On page 4 of the packet.
I got it. All right, so notice is hereby given that the Select Board of the Town of Holliston will hold a public hearing at 7:30 p.m. on Monday, April 12th, 2021, that's tonight, in the Select Board's meeting room, room 105 at the Holliston Town Hall, 703 Washington Street, for the purpose of considering the proposed acceptance of Summit Point Drive in its entirety as a public way, and which layout is shown more fully on a plan entitled Plan of Acceptance of Summit Point Drive. I am not going to read those numbers, in Holliston, Massachusetts, dated September 10th, 2020, prepared for Nature Walk Development LLC of North Reading, prepared by Cornerstone Engineering in Northborough, and further, if the town will accept the following easements: drainage and maintenance easement, drainage and maintenance access easement, site distance easement, and fire cistern easement. All is shown there on the plan, which is on file with the town clerk's office, and further that the board be authorized to enter into any and all documents and agreements necessary to effectuate same or take any action relative thereto.
I'll entertain a motion to open this hearing.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Hearing is now open. So for the purposes of this discussion, Mr. Ahern, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the issue to us.
Great, so as we approach the May town meeting, this is an article that would be potentially put on the warrant, so that's one of the reasons that we're here, the public hearing as it relates to that. I see on the call that we have Karen Sherman, the town planner, and I believe there's also representation for the developer as well. Mr. Connors, I believe, just waved there. And so we have received some feedback. The abutters in the 7 Point area were notified of the public hearing. and so we can get into that momentarily. Additionally, the map Chris Mayo can pull up so everybody can situate. And other than that, is there anything else specifically to introducing the topic, Karen, that you'd like to add before we get into the map? She's unmuting herself. No. Okay. Oh.
No, I don't have anything. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's perfect. All right. So this is a map of the area, and maps that would be on file with the clerk's office and would be referenced in the article on the warrant. The roadway, as the clerk read earlier, I believe is in the entirety of Summit Point Drive, although we do say station to station is included in the mapping. This is one of two images, I believe. Chris, if you could just flip to the next one as well, so we can see for the completion of Summit Point Drive. You can see the number of residences, obviously, in each of these maps, and I see a number of people from Summit Point Drive who are here on the call. We did have a review by the town planner, Ali Parand, as the engineer on behalf of the town, and the highway, who went up there, have a short punch list of things that can still be accomplished, although at this point, I think we could sort of ask any questions that the select board may have and then open it up to public comment and then see where the board is with this particular article.
Thank you very much, Travis. Any questions on this matter, Mr. Sparrow?
I think my only question is just there's been some concern, a little bit of concern about drainage. I know some residents have brought this to our attention, and I just kind of wanted to understand how this, will this be repaired before the town before the town becomes responsible for this particular road? That's kind of my big concern.
Why don't we ask the developer, Mr. Connors. Good evening, Mr. Connors. How are you?
Hi, I'm George Connors. I represent Nature Walk. I'm also a principal at Cornerstone. I'm aware of the drainage issues which were made aware of by Habitat last, I think, Wednesday. On Friday, I had been walking the site and talked to Ms. Sherman, and she alerted me to the issue at 32. I happened to be walking up towards that at the time, and I reviewed some photographs of water and drainage coming down. And tomorrow morning, we have our engineer going to meet out on the site. Any of the drainage improvements that will take place to correct that issue, which we feel are all going to take place well off the roadway, are basically going to be behind the curb line and enter into what was installed as sub-drains for the road to protect the road surface. It's a road that was begun sometime after 2004. Northeastern University owned the property sometime up to about 2014, at which time Nature Walk took it over and completed it. There was a modification to the subdivision, basically for some granite and some various landscaping features. And we have looked at the drainage system with cameras and all that sort of thing. There's basically two punch lists of trash and erosion, stuff like that, that after the winter need to be addressed. The drainage system, there was some improvements to that for that lot 32 not too long ago. I have the invoice and the work shown in that from Summit. And the drainage problem seems to persist with some over surface flow, and it's getting out to the street at a higher velocity, so it doesn't stay in the gutter. We think we can pick that up and carry it into the back of the drainage system off the street.
Thank you, Mr. Connors. We'll start with that.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good.
Questions, Dina?
No, just, Karen, you're on the call. I'm wondering, DPW, fire, police, they've all checked off any punch list items that they have, or they've added whatever they feel they might need to add to the final list of items to be taken care of? I'm basically asking if they've reviewed any outstanding issues.
I don't want to speak for Mike, but I know that we mentioned that the fire cistern, there's a couple of pipes that probably need repainting. This is kind of a unique situation because the site does not have public water, so there is a cistern system installed in the ground for fire protection. That's just kind of a housekeeping issue. It is red, it's painted red and it's faded with time.
Okay. That is it.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Connors, thanks for your response to Mr. Scarl's question on drainage. But for me, a layperson, help me understand a little bit about the acceptance of the road on behalf of the town and our risk and the work that you all have to do to improve the drainage through the remaining bond balance of the project. There's a difference there, right?
There's about $80,000 in surety in place. Most of that is addressing erosion and removal of erosion controls and final commissioning of detention basins and things of that nature. All of the heavy work has been done, so that amount of money is well in excess of whatever is needed to take trash out and fix a little bit of erosion. There's 2 or 3 issues about trees and buffer trees that are easily addressed. Basically, there's $80,000 surety, and the work that would take place to correct this 32 problem. I think you can look at the previous invoice. I think it was about $1,500 to tie in that drain that was daylighting. Now it's really just surface water coming through. So I think that gives us an indication that we're not going to spend a lot of money to do this, and we're not going into the road. Yeah, it was $1,332 for the work that was done back in mid-January on that lot 9 foundation drain. That was the Arthur Pyburn and Sons invoice to Habitat. Don't think it would be anywhere near $80,000. I think it would be more like the 1,300 to 25 or 3,000.
The streetlights on Summit Point Drive, are they LED and upgraded?
No streetlights.
There are no streetlights, okay.
No, this was an old subdivision back in '04, and it was started by Prism Corp. They lost it, but they had put the road in place, the drainage, the detention was all scarfed out. And they put it to binder, and then they lost it. Northeastern took it over. It sat for quite a while. When Summit Point took it over, Nature Walk took it over, they changed from concrete to granite curbing for a better edge. And during the last issue, just before fall, they scraped up a major portion of surface pavement and relaid the binder before putting down a top coat. So it's been well cared for and it's been well constructed. We had opportunity to cut through the pavement in, I think, 4 or 5 areas, and we viewed the subgrade and the binder thickness during the construction that Nature Walk did. And it was all satisfactory, adequate, and good material.
Thank you very much. I think at this point, the board's asked its questions. I'll turn it over to the public to see if there are any questions from those on our Zoom call for the Summit Point Road acceptance. If you have a question, please raise your hand, be recognized with your name and address.
This is Matt Coletti, 31 Summit Point Drive. I guess I'll go first. I don't have so much a question as I do a comment. And I just want to note, Cornerstone Engineering is not Habitat, they're not the same entity. Habitat is the developer of the land. Nature Walk was the owner. And Habitat is also one of the parties that made representations to the purchasers of land on Summit Point Drive when the homes were purchased. First question relates to the status of the proceeding. Can we just confirm that the public way approval requires that this be an article warrant that is to be reviewed at town meeting in May?
That is my understanding, Matt.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Then, I'm sorry, what was that?
Absolutely. So the process requires the planning board to make a recommendation to the select board to have a public hearing and present their recommendation to the town meeting through the town clerk.
Great, thank you. And is that currently on the article? Is that an article on the warrant for May?
It is.
Right, thank you.
It is.
So then with respect to tonight, I would just ask that no determination be made yet. I'd request a continuance of this hearing until the next select board meeting. This proceeding is governed by Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 82, Section 22, that requires notice be provided 7 days in advance. This notice was received by the homeowners on April 7th, which was a Wednesday, late in the afternoon. That's only 5 days notice today. That notice is insufficient. We've discussed so far the subdivision being established first by Prism Corp. I'm curious if there's any order of conditions that are still outstanding. Not had an opportunity to review the site plan myself. I think I have that opportunity as a homeowner here. There could be issues relating to erosion that could concern Ashland or other parties of interest. I want to understand the full scope of this discussion before any determinations are made. And I think 5 days is insufficient notice to do that.
All right. Anything else, Matt?
No, that's it.
All right. Thanks for your contribution. Any other questions from those on our Zoom call? Again, please state your name and address if you wish to be heard.
Yeah, hey, this is the 32 homeowner.
Good evening. Your name, please?
Yeah, Andy Pisano.
Hello, Andy. What's on your mind?
Hey, so the plan that Cornerstone is going to come up with, is that something that can be shared with the town so their engineer can just give it a once over?
Yes.
So I'll let the developer answer that, but we don't technically have an engineer that will be assessing that. We have department heads who will review that particular plan. Is that
Got it.
correct, Mr. Arnold?
We did, the engineer that we use as a consultant, Ali Parand, has been up in the site with Karen and Tom. I did send a message earlier based on the correspondence we received from Mr. Pisano, that anything that they intend to do on his behalf that they send to us so that we can run it by Ali Parand, just to make sure that it works. Again, you know, if there's anything that would touch the street, it was mentioned earlier by Mr. Connors. And just have that reviewed.
Right, Ali's on contract, that's what it's about. Does that answer your question, Andy?
Yeah, that's what I was asking about. Yep.
Anything else?
Andy, did you want to pull up the issues that you had there, or are you satisfied with Mr. Connors' description earlier?
Well, you know, I think we went over a lot this morning on the property, and the builder, you know, discussed two things they're going to do. So I don't think we have to review that.
So you're good this evening, Andy?
Yeah, I am. I like what I heard. I think the builder is putting in the right amount of effort to fix it.
All right. Thank you, sir. So any other folks on the Zoom call wish to be heard this evening?
Hey, good evening. Can you guys hear me?
We can. Identify yourself and your address, please.
This is Matt Brooks. I live at 11 Summit Point. I'm on the south end of the subdivision, and myself, along with 7 Summit Point and 3 Summit Point, we're on the far south end. And when the drainage irrigation issue that they were putting in over here on this far side, I'm sure George from Cornerstone has seen this area over here. The irrigation runoff is extremely faster than I think they anticipated, and they've had major erosion control over here. Now, I've taken multiple pictures. I know the excavator company was out here as well, made an impromptu change last spring to try to get some of that erosion under control. Those pictures have been sent to both the builder as well as the excavation company. We were told they were out last week, but no one stopped by the house. I've received communication that they're planning on coming out this week to mitigate or fix the issue. But yet, so far at this point, I don't know what that plan is. And I'm along the lines of Matt Coletti, that I would want to see and know exactly that irrigation runoff problem. I keep calling it irrigation, but it's you know, the runoff from the land is mitigated properly, and that is a concern. So I'm not sure if George wants to comment on that, knowing that, you know, from an engineering perspective, what they've done at Cornerstone, what they're planning on doing there.
I would
George,
like
anything?
to, I would like to, I don't know the address numbers. I know the lot numbers. So if you could tell me where.
So lot 3, lot 2, and lot 1.
The south end. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's some areas where those lots were just recently finished, and the vegetation really hasn't taken in certain areas, and wherever there's a concentrated flow, there's some erosion. I had walked that Friday, that whole back area. So they're going to be taking care of that. As I indicated earlier, the bond has, let's see, for detention basin, which we assumed was 90% completed. So whatever erosion is down there is 29,000. And then under the soil erosion and sediment control, there's still 11,000 left for that. And then in top seeding, there's about 4,000. So the bulk of the punch list items sureties is about 40, 29, $45,000 to take care of erosion. Certainly during the period of winter when there's no infiltration, they'll get a little bit more erosion on the open soil than typically occurs during the growing season. So that'll all be fixed with that kind of money over the next few weeks and months of the growing season.
Yeah, I know that last spring they tried fixing all of that and put hydro seeding in. I know that lot 2 next to me has sprinkler heads showing. They put in a makeshift impromptu riprap rock. I don't know what you would call it, thing to slow down the irrigation. It was not part of the original plan. It does look a little eyesore, but to try to mitigate that runoff, but that impromptu doesn't look like it's made a dent. In fact, if anything, over the summer, it was, there's video. I mean, we have video of water almost like a running river, White Rapids River, on all sides of the riprap, and irrigation or an erosion of over 18 inches or deeper in spaces around that. So we can say that winter is not the growing season. Summer for lot 2 last year was completely seeded, as well as mine was completely seeded, and that seeding all ran off. I actually paid a third party to come in and just put topsoil and dressing on that, and every bit of that was washed away, even in the fall when rain is less of an issue. So I would want to see the plan. I think all of us on this end of the subdivision, lot 1, 2, and 3, we would want to see what that plan is and make sure that it's mitigated before I would feel comfortable that we're signing off on anything.
Did you share that with Habitat?
They've received communication both on email as well as on text from me on all of these matters. I mean, I've been told that they're going to correct them, but I just want to make sure that I know what that plan is. So far,
Fair enough.
the only thing I know is that we're going to take care of it. So we could put, guarantee on the side of the box and call it the guarantee, but I think I want more than something just guaranteed on the side of the box.
I was not aware of this particular problem, but I'll certainly bring it up to them tomorrow.
Well, but you walked the property and you saw the problem. You see that there is a problem, right?
There were various places where there was erosion and there was topsoil eroded away and it needed to be replaced, yes. Throughout the site, down basins.
Right. I would just say that if they did the same thing they did before, and then they signed off on it, what is the liability for the developer to come back in and fix it again? Probably not as much.
Well, as we indicated, we wouldn't be seeking any reduction in the surety till it's acceptable to the planning board. And these are really punch list items. So we indicated that by Habitat's signing an agreement.
Okay. Well, like I said, so far, both Habitat and the excavation company have been very prompt in returning my communications. I think I've been very patient with allowing them to give opportunity to fix it. As long as they're going to fix it, I'll probably be in the same boat as Andy is, as long as they're going to fix it.
I wouldn't have any question that they would fix it.
Anything else, Mr. Brooks?
Not this time.
Thank you. Any other comments from those on the Zoom call for the Summit Point Road site?
Yeah, hey, this is Andy again, 32.
Yes, go ahead.
Right, hey, while we got Cornerstone here, I just for clarity, the fixes that I heard today were a yard drain being added in a swale. And I had signed over an agreement for them to start that. But there was some asphalt work that involves, the apron area of the driveway, but it does go into the road also.
No, we're not going into the road.
Yeah,
I
so
made that
that's
very clear to them sometime today. I was out of the office till sometime around noon, and we finally decided that we were going to go out there and look at this. But I made it very clear that we're not going into the road. We don't have to.
yeah, there's a raised pad in the road that we did a water test today with some buckets, and this was with George and Bob. I mean, this was the discussion that had the most, meat to it. We can see the water forces, the ridge forces the water into the road, taking on the same pattern as the ice. So that was the main part of our discussion. And, so Bob went into length on how he could, resolve that.
Sure he did, but we're going to have a veto over anything going into the road by our engineer veto.
Okay. So so there's still going to be, okay, so that was kind of more discussed as the root cause of it. So, I mean, we can have, another discussion, but there's a raised section in the road that you can just clearly see it forces the water around it into the road. It takes on the same shape as how the ice forms.
Well, the design engineer will be out there tomorrow morning.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Pisano?
No, just, I'll stay in touch with you what gets recommended here.
Gotcha.
In the morning.
All right, thank you. At this point, I think I'll make an announcement. Mr. Coletti had mentioned early on that the notice given to the butters was insufficient, and that it did not meet the 7-day notice period. Just, Matt, for your information, you probably know this. One of the reasons we tried to get it in this evening, or started this evening, was because we need to give 21-day notice before town meeting for the article to be approved. I concur with your need for more time. It seems as though there are still a couple of things that need to be worked out and discussed. And with the board's agreement, I'll seek a motion to continue this hearing. Now, before we take the vote, I just want to remark that we're going to have to check with our counsel to make sure that that's fine. I suspect it may be. But if we do run into any issues associated with the collision of the date for town meeting, which is May 10th, this board may have to post a different day between now and then to continue the hearing within a certain time period. So keep an eye on any postings for that. But believing that not to be the case, and that will be fine, we'll continue this hearing until next week, unless otherwise noted. So I'll entertain a motion from Mr. Sparrow to continue this hearing until April 19th.
20th.
I beg your pardon, April 20th is a holiday. Yep.
I will make that motion.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. So folks, we'll hope that the dialogue with the developer continues and that there's some progress towards some resolutions over the next week. If you have any questions during that time period, please reach out to Mr. Ahern.
Could you just repeat the date, please?
That will be Tuesday, April 20th, because Monday's a holiday. I forgot that.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm going to guess around the same time, 7:30. Yeah.
All right. I just need the date. Thank you.
You good?
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, folks. we're gonna move on in our agenda now, back to, item number 4, which is warrants, Ben Farrell Show.
Great thought. Here we go. All right, I have, one warrant, and I'll make the motion to approve the warrant in the amount of $1,860,849.54. Of that, $1,294,891.58 is town payroll.
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Public comment, Mr. Sparrow.
I have nothing this evening.
Fine.
I will only announce that this Saturday from 9 to 12, I believe, at the high school is an electronics recycling event held by one of the Boy Scout troops in town. I think it's PAC 47, forgive me if I have that wrong. The list is exhaustive, and we want to keep these things out of our regular trash, so I really encourage folks to gather their recycling and take it on down to the high school this Saturday, 9 to 1.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to, I was going to add that, but thanks for doing that. Just reiterate the notice by our veterans. They're raising money to build out the area Blair Square for a veterans monument. They are putting out information online at www.hollistonveterans.org for people to purchase a brick to help with the fundraising of that project. If you need any more information, you can contact American Legion Post 47 and care of Stephen Napolitano. So I want to make that announcement as well. Tonight, any other public comments from those assembled on our Zoom call? Hearing none. The Travis Ahern Show. Good evening.
Hello. Okay, just two very quick things. One, I did receive communication from a resident looking for the town hall to display the pride flag in June. Also notified me that they would be doing something similar with the school, so I'm trying to coordinate through Dr. Kuska and then report back as we get closer to June about how we'll handle the pride flag. I believe last year was the first year it was displayed on town hall, so more to come in the coming weeks.
Travis, can I just make a comment on that?
Sure.
It would be great to have a way that it's a sustaining decision that we don't revisit every year. That may be where we're headed anyway, but it would be, so I'd be interested to know how we make it something that we don't, if the board were to decide if the best decision was to not have to have the group come back every year. I think that's a piece to consider in the discussion over flying the flag during the month of June.
I think there's quite a few things that we could, if we could remove doing on an annual basis and those types of things and build in would be excellent. I think that's one of them.
Okay.
That goes to other things that we deal with annually, like the public displays during the holidays. It comes up every year.
Right.
Okay.
If there's a way to streamline it, we'll look at it, but I'm all in favor of policy, so.
Gotcha.
Let's do some homework on that.
And then I think, there's quite a few things, but obviously we have a number of items coming up soon. So I would just reiterate, I believe what the chief mentioned earlier, but thank you very much to the Youth and Family Services Director, Jackie Weiner, who has been very helpful in navigating the many options that people have to be signing up for appointments and helping staff that are eligible to get their appointments through, whether it be CBS or other sites, has been working diligently to help staff as they've requested help or become tired by the process. I just want to express my thanks to Jackie for all that she's done on behalf of employees. And with that, I think the majority of what I'll say tonight will be under number 8 and 9.
Very good. Any questions for the town administrator? None. We'll move on to that phase of our agenda dealing with the FY22 budget and the revenue discussions.
Okay, so a couple items have changed as it relates specifically to the budget. I have had no changes to the revenue assumption since we've discussed over the past month. I am waiting for any new information as it relates to state aid, but I'll pull up the sheet that we've been looking at for an update, and then I will be looking for votes as it relates to some changes. Hold on. There we go. So this is the view that we're used to seeing now, and this has a change which I've highlighted in yellow. As we've said numerous times that we have a difference as it relates in the blue to the FinCom model versus the town administrator model. I had a discussion earlier with the capital subcommittee about sort of making sure that we're getting the number that everybody can be comfortable with, but addresses the needs. And so I will continue those discussions, but at the moment we do still have a discrepancy. The thing I want to highlight are the three items on the bottom, right above that yellow box. And these are changes that have been made in the past week due to new information. So one of the things that I would highlight on the wastewater treatment plant is that right around the time James Keast and I presented the wastewater treatment plant budget to you, we have been notified by the contractor who services that plant that they'd be leaving. They triggered the 90-day notice in their contract because they said they weren't making money on the town in the current structure. So the facilities manager went out and canvassed the landscape and has a deal back. What we had done at the time was to increase that amount to what the outgoing group had said that they felt it would be profitable. We have heard from others that they can do the job. It will be a slight increase over the prior year, but nothing like the $75,000 that we had budgeted, be more in the $66,000 range. So we are able to bring that budget back down $7,000, which I can show in a moment and we can go over. So that would be a savings of $7,000 from what you were presented. Negatively, on the other side of that, I also had a conversation with Maya, who, after crunching all of the information and previously having given me what I believed was a conservative estimate of 8% increase year over year, came back after crunching all the numbers with a 175% loss ratio on the property liability insurance specifically, and has a $30,493 increase over what I had budgeted, which I'll show in a moment in its entirety. So that those two are just based on new information, and they went different ways on us, and I'll show that in a moment. The last one here that I wanted to highlight is specific to the DPW budget, going up $10,000, as I'll show in a moment. Essentially, the bottom line of DPW is for all intents and purposes, flat. But the $10,000 increase here is actually related to a significant offset in what is planned for the capital budget article on town meeting, which is that the priority item within the DPW highway fleet was going to be the street sweeper. Our current street sweeper is in the shop, and so we have been contracting out those services. The DPW highway presented a solution that would be to continue to look at whether or not contracting out street sweeping services is in the best interest of the town. And essentially what I'd be bringing to you tonight is the idea that within the FY22 budget, we would budget as if we were going to contract out those services, bump from the May town meeting the capital item that is $250,000 plus for a sweeper, not remove it from the capital list, but move it to an assumption for October as we determine if this is the right system to use for the town. So the reason $10,000 is being added here, that is not the cost of contracting out the service. The cost, if we were to annualize what we've been doing this spring, which we feel is working, would probably be in the maximum of about $20,000 per year. The reason $10,000 will be added is that the net would include some savings as it relates to the maintenance of a street sweeper, including the products that go into it, the actual sort of sweeping equipment, and then obviously the sweeper that is currently in the shop, as it got towards the end of its useful life, as these things do, was causing quite a bit of maintenance issues. Not related or related to this, but not necessarily quantified, would be the fact that we would also be freeing up a heavy equipment operator who, at a very peak time of year in the street sweeping, is being put in a street sweeper at a time where we need our highway staff available throughout town, whether it be opening parks, those types of things, opening and using all the equipment that's necessary for those things. So at this point, my recommendation would be that we try this, not remove the sweeper from our sort of capital plan, but bump it from May, give us time to evaluate this model, and plan for the $10,000. So the last time I showed this to you, which I believe was a week ago, this number in yellow, was $98,234, excuse me. The impact of the three things I just mentioned was $33,000, which brings this balance down to $64,000. I would point out that $64,000 as it relates to this budget is essentially, I mean, we're there, right? We're right at the edge. It's a rounding error almost on a budget this size. But at the same point, you know, the impact that we're looking at right here does fit. So if there's any questions on this, otherwise I can show the three budgets affected here on the bottom line.
Any questions, Ben?
Yeah, what is the lifespan of a sweeper? Would they last like 20 years?
No, I would say 5 to 10. I mean, they get a lot of use.
Yeah.
I think 10 is generally the number that we use for a vehicle that size.
Yeah.
I think between year 5 and year 10 is when you're going to see an uptick in maintenance on that.
Yeah. It just almost feels like, I mean, with a cost of like almost $250,000, you know, granted, you know, thinking ahead, but it's sort of, you know, it almost feels like contracting it out, you know, could be almost more cost effective than owning the sweeper. But I think we have to do the math.
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that we're getting the level of service that we want. So what we would lose is having it at our beck and call, right?
Right.
So if there's an accident on the roadway and there's a spillage of sand, we're responding to that with other equipment and not a street sweeper.
Right.
Or, you know, getting the street sweeper there as soon as we can through a contracted service. So there are those types of impacts, but on a day-to-day basis and planning for the year, as we get into the peak times where we also are seeing the need for that heavy equipment operator elsewhere in town,
right.
I think it's worth sort of looking. It's not a no-brainer, I guess, is my point.
I get you.
But I think
I just wanted to sort of think of it just, how does that factor in, is sort of the lifespan of particular equipment. One other question, sort of more holistic question here. I haven't been keeping up with my finance committee meetings. My Wednesdays have been a little bit busy the last couple of weeks. Has the finance committee taken any votes on any of the numbers that they're proposing in their model? Or is it just a model that they're putting in a spreadsheet at this point?
It's a model that they've discussed. I think they went through the model last Tuesday night, though.
All right. So they have a consensus, but they haven't actually taken a vote that this is what they're going to do?
No votes, no.
No votes. Okay. And my last thing here is we have a 5-year capital plan, correct?
I have a draft that I've presented to the capital subcommittee.
Yep. And have the schools contributed a 5-year piece for that, or not?
The numbers that I'm using for the schools in that plan are a carry forward from prior years, and the numbers that I have for this May have come from the presentation of the schools for the FY22 budget.
So our stuff is pretty good for 5 years, including like facilities and things like that, and expectations from James about replacements and things like that need to be done from our end.
Yeah, I think there's improvements on the town side as well. I think through complete streets and some other items that are giving us more and more data. I think once we get the data back from the studies that were approved.
Probably like 75-80% of the way there.
We're getting there.
In a capital plan from this side, we need like just some school input to make sure that we can get some of these numbers buttoned up over the long term.
Right, and I think one of the things I saw in the May numbers that the school committee has discussed for capital, they also discussed the idea that they would be looking to do a 5-year capital plan for FY23 through 27.
Yeah.
So the idea would be at some point, yes, we need to marry these two together.
Yeah, it's more helpful to have, because they have such a substantial amount of capital needs, to be able to understand where they're coming from, to be able to do some capital planning for long term.
Right, but I think bringing forward the information we had originally from the Collins Center and it had been updated, at least puts in the context of the 5-year plan. It puts in the context that there are some sizable costs out there that we know are coming for the schools as it relates to just keeping those facilities running.
Okay. Good. Yep.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So on the street sweeper, do we currently have a contract for this season? We
engaged because the street sweeper was down.
Right.
We went through a process with the state. It was interesting. It was actually the first time I'd ever gone through this particular process. a prevailing wage sheet, generally speaking, you go to the state and you ask them for the prevailing wage sheet. In this instance, we asked them for it, and they asked us for our information. Then they designed us a prevailing wage sheet, which then allowed us to engage a contractor for this service. We don't have a long-term contract with that person, but we've engaged the person who's been doing the street sweeping in town. So I would look, if we wanted to do this, to sort of see what we could get under contract for a period of time, and then use that period of time as the evaluation period. But we have a contractor currently doing the work.
So when you talk about evaluating outsourcing the street sweeping, as we are currently doing, when you talk about evaluating that before October town meeting to make a decision on the street sweeper, we will be evaluating what's currently in place today.
Right.
Okay. So are they handed the O&M plan, the operating, well, I guess it would be the plan for street sweeping for the town of Holliston? Are they handed something by our DPW? How do they know what streets to hit and when and so on? How do they set up that schedule? Is that something that's been handed to them, or is that something that they're
getting that
on their own?
Direction from the highway, but I'd have to look at specifically what they've been given.
Okay. All right. I mean, I think there's a little bit of a concern that perhaps not all streets are getting cleaned on a spring basis.
Okay.
And that some are that it's not consistent. But I wouldn't know because I wouldn't know what the schedule is, and I wouldn't know how to verify whether or not that's true. So that would be one thing.
Are you talking about this spring, or are you talking about in general?
I'm talking about in general, previous spring.
Okay.
Spring. When do they finish up their work, this current street sweeping crew?
I believe the number that I was given is that they're probably 50% of the way done at the moment, but I'd have to double check with highway on that.
Okay.
But so there's a list to be accomplished of work to do.
Yeah.
The structure of this particular agreement is that we pay them essentially on an hourly basis, and then they're reporting back on the miles that they're doing, and that's what we'd be evaluating to make sure that that's what we're getting a good deal for that, and then we're able to sort of run it against the cost of the street sweeper with our own staff and those types of things.
Okay.
And do that analysis.
Okay. I'm just wondering, how do we compare what should be happening with what is happening when we evaluate? Is there a way in which we're going to do that before we make a decision in the fall? I really like what you've proposed. I think that's great. I think Tom's recommendation to consider this is a great one. I appreciate that he brought the idea forward. I think it's a really strong thought and a really strong idea. I would just want to make sure that if we were in the fall to make a decision to repeat this, to do a contract for the following spring, that we have in some way evaluated whether or not we're meeting residents' expectations in terms of street sweeping. So I'm not sure how we go about doing that. If there was a plan of a schedule of streets, that would be one way to ensure that it was done. But I don't know if that plan exists or that schedule exists. So I'm just going to put that out on the table. So I totally would move forward on this because, again, I think it's a great idea, but I think we need that that verification that resident expectations were met this spring, and if this spring is following previous spring schedules, that previous springs are also being cleaned to the extent that residents were expecting or looking for.
Okay. I think I understand, and certainly the analysis needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the idea would be, that we would be doing that. When you say sort of resident expectations on street sweeping, this isn't a category that I generally think. I mean, there are certainly other ones that fall in that category. As I look at street sweeping, there are certainly ones that we need to do from a making sure the streets are sort of are kept. The other part is that street sweeping is necessary for our MS4 permits from a stormwater component. There's a number of things that go into it, but I think I'm clear on.
Well, it's 92 miles, 250 roads.
Yep.
If the plan is, it has always been and will be that 92 miles and 250 roads are being swept, and if it's not, I just don't know that information.
Okay.
But if we can evaluate that, that would
be part of the evaluation.
Thank you. That was my comment.
Excellent. Just a couple comments. First, again, Travis, these weekly presentations of our budget position are just exquisite. You're showing your financial expertise, and I have no problem with the adjustments that are being made. This is fine-tuning, a $67 million enterprise. We're in a great spot here to be prepared for town meeting, so thank you for doing that. Regarding the program for street sweeping, the only question I had was, is it common for our communities around us to be using contracted services for this type of work?
So another part of the evaluation would be to sort of make sure that we're comparing what we're doing as best practice to our neighboring communities. That would be part of it as well. There are other communities that contract out the service, and I think what we would want to see is in those specific instances where, let's say it's an accident that has a spill on the roadway, that we are prepared to address those the same way a neighboring community that contracts out the work would be. Right? And how are they doing it? Is it that they have a smaller piece of equipment that we could also purchase that looks much better on the capital plan? Right, then we pursue that as well.
The only questions I have at this point. So it would appear as though we have to revote a few budgets. Is that correct?
Yes. And I can pull those up.
Point us in that direction.
Okay, so this is the highway budget. It was as presented last time, except this number in red becomes $32,000 with the $10,000 increase that I highlighted on the bottom of the other sheet, and this becomes the new bottom line number that I would ask you to vote, and then I will present. We'll go through these three, and if you are in favor of those three, I'll send these to the Finance Committee to let them know of the adjustments.
Ben, do you have your hands on those numbers?
Sure. So I'll make a motion to approve the revised FY '22 DPW highway budget in the amount of $1,472,392.
Have a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Next one, Travis.
The wastewater budget, the net change is $7,000 decrease. These two line items in red change, and the bottom line is $97,700.
I'll make a motion to, got confused because the page is animal control officer. I will make a motion to approve the revised FY '22 wastewater treatment budget, in the amount of $97,700.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries.
And lastly, this one, I think, certainly is going to lead to a lot of conversations between now and the FY '23 budget, as it relates to this number, which, I don't think any of us are probably going to be comfortable with. I will say it is related to our loss ratio. I went through those numbers. At the same point, I have had discussions with competition for Maya, who we use for property and liability insurance, and I think that we'll most likely be having a conversation if we don't feel like this number can get under control. At the same point, the number is what it is, and we're not in a position to change at the moment. So unfortunately, we will have to eat this increase and have a further discussion as we look at FY '23. So this number in red is the one that changes.
Ben, do you have that?
I will make a motion to approve the revised FY '22 budget for liability insurance in the amount of $320,291.
Second?
I'll second that.
Just brief discussion. When you talk about loss ratio, for those listening at home, Travis, you're referring to the fact that the town has had multiple claims against our insurance over the last several years that contributes to that ratio.
Yes. I would say within this policy, I'm sorry to cut you off, within this policy too, we have coverage for departments such as the police, in anything where the HPD may be sued. It covers any of our board members, boards and committees who may be sued personally through their work on behalf of the town. We're covered through this. So it is a very wide-ranging policy, but the loss ratio of the 175 is specifically to property and liability insurance last year, where we had a number of claims for a variety of reasons.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Thank you, Travis. Let's move on to the annual town meeting discussion. We have a couple of factors in play here. We're going to start with Chief Cassidy. Last week, we'd asked Chief to come prepared to talk with us in preparation for the annual town meeting, which I believe is scheduled for May 10th.
May 10th.
Yeah, thank you. At the high school auditorium. The last two town meetings, last July, December, public health matters associated with the pandemic were front and center. They dictated a few things, including the delay of both meetings and the quorums. Before we approach the May 10th meeting, we've been watching and listening to you weekly discuss the coronavirus community impact. Things are trending well. I think everyone feels comfortable, yet we are still in a social distancing world that requires us to be mindful that this virus is still very much among us. And so we thought it'd be important to have you first check with the schools, circle in with our host to make sure that we're in a good place to host an annual town meeting there in May, and give us your feedback and recommendations as they stand today. You're up.
Great. So just a reminder, under the current public health guidelines and the executive action from the governor, we are not subject to the gathering size restrictions that apply to other indoor spaces because this is considered to be a legislative body. However, Chris, if you could bring up my second slide deck. As it pertains to the social distancing requirements and the seating capacity, there are two different options that we could pursue based on the facilities available at the high school. The first one would be similar to what we had in December, which would be to hold the town meeting in the auditorium. Based on the distancing requirements and anticipating some people will come individually, others may come as part of a 2 or 3 household unit, the capacity of that room would be 152 individuals. There is some concern that 152 might not be large enough for the anticipated crowds. Therefore, we would need to use an overflow room, which the most convenient overflow would be the cafeteria, which has a capacity under COVID restrictions of 133. So, I'll discuss the two options, and then we can discuss pros and cons as well. But that would be sort of the first option, which would be essentially a hybrid of both July and December, because in December, we were all in one room. In July, we conducted our business in one room, but we had planned for an overflow. The only people that were in the overflow were a couple of staff members, right? So the other option, if we're trying to get everybody in the same room, would be to set up operations in the field house, which would have a capacity of 292 individuals. So, a lot of it's going to come down to how many folks the board anticipates might be coming on any day of town meeting, and weighing the benefits of everybody meeting in the same room versus having an overflow and having somebody possibly have to travel from the cafeteria to the auditorium if they wish to be heard on a specific article. Some of the pros of keeping it in the auditorium and using CAF for overflow is the ease of the setup for audiovisual. The soundboard is already there, the room is already pre-wired for microphones, it already has the speakers in place. The setup for HCAT is very intuitive. They've been doing this for years. It's also fixed seating, which means that it's a lot easier to set up that room. The projector's there, and you've got the stage, which allows certain elected and or appointed officials to be in a visible location. Again, if somebody wishes to be heard on an article, there might be a slight delay for them to get from the cafeteria down to the auditorium, because what we had at the Placentino Miller back in July was we had a microphone set up just inside the doorway from the hallway between the gymnasium and the cafetorium. So if we had a microphone set up in the auditorium and there was a signal that someone was coming from the cafeteria, the moderator could pause while that person possibly queued up in line. Some of the challenges of the field house, although it would be convenient to have everybody in the same room, the acoustics aren't good, the audiovisual isn't there. When they host graduation in that room, they need to rent audio. I mean, they contract out audiovisual equipment, which is brought in and set up by a third party, and it's going to interfere with curriculum delivery for probably 1 or 2 days, because this would need to be set up the Sunday night before our Monday meeting, and the anticipation is this is going to be a 2-night meeting. Then they would not be able to use the field house for instruction on that Monday or Tuesday. The chairs, the school district owns. They have 200 chairs at each of the 4 buildings. So if we needed to set up 133 chairs in the cafeteria, they've got them on site. If we needed to set up close to 300 chairs, 200 of them are already at the high school. They would need to bring essentially 100 from another location. So a lot comes down to what kind of crowd you're anticipating and whether you think everyone would be there for the whole thing, or some people might be coming for just one article and therefore they could sort of be in a staging area, and then when they wanted to come and be heard on a particular article, but weren't planning on being there for all of the articles.
So my first reaction is, have you had a look at the last several annual town meeting numbers to see, based on 30-something articles, what we're expecting to discuss, what that census looks like, and then having 2 previous COVID meetings, look at those to see if there's some kind of a COVID percentage adjustment that we should think about. I guess it's the only way to really reliably predict what we might be looking at in terms of a number that could be coming in.
Right. I haven't looked at the trend pre-COVID. Obviously, we are in a much better place from a public health standpoint, and it would not be my recommendation to lower quorum. I know that question has been raised as well. So we're looking for 100 people to be able to conduct the town's business.
Minimum, yeah.
Yes. And when I shared these 2 options with the town clerk, she thought that it was a lot of work just to essentially gain 7 people by putting everybody in one room. That it seemed more logical and probably easier for all of the departments involved to do the auditorium with an overflow of the CAF, which would be, if I had to make a recommendation today, that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Any questions, Beth?
Yeah. I remember one of the challenges in December is that the schools needed some time to deep clean after the event. So we wanted to make sure that's one of the reasons we chose to do it on a Saturday. Is that still the case, that they're going to be looking to deep clean? Are we really disrupting things once they putting this in the...
So the auditorium is not being used for curriculum delivery during term 4, which began today. So they would not need to do a deep clean for educational purposes. We certainly would have the ability to use the handheld electrostatic sprayer between when it ends on Monday night and when we come back on Tuesday. And in terms of the cafeteria, it could be turned around pretty quickly as well. So between when it ended to when they would need it the next day.
I think my, like some of the conversation, I want to make sure, I think the numbers I seem to remember from some of the previous town meetings pre-COVID were like in the 400 range is what I seem to remember, something like that. Maybe that might be completely off base or something like that, but
I can certainly.
I thought something like that was sort of out there, but obviously with COVID, there's certainly going to be some people who might not feel comfortable attending. One of the things that we want to make sure is that, certainly we want the people, if they're in an overflow, to be able to participate if they have questions, things like that, but also making sure that we have logistics to let them vote. I mean, that's ultimately, the critical part is to ensure that people have a chance to actually participate in the voting. And, we've also talked that this could potentially be tune outs too. So what does that look like, and how does that impact things? Are we able to turn things around so we can have a second night of the case? I think that should factor into this. So, yeah, but I do kind of agree with the clerk that it seems kind of like, so we're going to gain 7 people and create a much bigger logistical hurdle. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
With perhaps a less desirable user experience for those that are gathered.
Yeah, and I think, keeping it to the auditorium, which is fairly familiar, people understand what it is, and people can move through it, and it would be easier on everybody, in my opinion. I think the only concern I would have is that if we reached capacity and we had, issues because we're too many people. But, you can certainly look at those numbers. That's all I got.
Thank you, Ben. Tina?
So I'm going to take an abrupt right turn and ask about outdoor, and here's why. Because for me, it's different from July and December because of the vaccination. So earlier you had said 45%, or somewhere in the 40s of adults eligible in the town of Holliston had received their first dose. And so there's a good reason to expect that, let me just put this out there, a delay in town meeting, to have more people vaccinated, to have weather a little bit more agreeable, and have the option to do this outside. Certainly have been to a graduation outdoors last year, and know the numbers are bigger than I think what we're talking about up here. And so I just want to put that out on the table, as a way, because for me, the fact that we have vaccinated adults, who will be more comfortable, and therefore I would expect somewhat higher turnout. Certainly the 292 or 282 or whatever you had up there between the two rooms, the auditorium and the cast, is significantly more than what we saw for turnout in July and December. But I just really would like to maintain the highest cap possible, and I think that with more adults vaccinated, we will expect to see more people turn up for town meeting. I think it's a bigger, different warrant than we've had in the past, and I just wonder about waiting for the weather to turn a little bit and considering this outdoors.
Had considered outdoors.
Okay.
Several factors, weather.
Yep.
If it rains,
We postpone, right.
right? Acoustics, as much as we suggested that they were going to be bad in the field house, they would be even worse on the field. And the ability to do presentations is extremely hampered if you're outdoors.
Okay. So you are not a proponent of...
I just don't see, and again, that's going to be a major lift for town departments.
Yep.
Who sets up the chairs? Who sets up, and you know, again, we would likely need to outsource to a sound company to be able to do it.
Do you see any advantage in a delay? So, you know, looking at the vaccination rate increasing over time, looking at, you know, I know May 10th is not that far away, but it would be great to have, you know, a significantly greater number of adults vaccinated and feeling comfortable, and time allows you that. So for that reason, I asked that question about a delay in town meeting.
Excellent question. Not one that I had given lengthy consideration to. That's your question too? Of course. I mean, if you look at the numbers, you look at where we were vaccination-wise a month ago, and to think of where we're going to be 8 weeks from now, again, with things being open to everybody age 16 and older as of April 19th, possibly after that, maybe even down as low as 12. Obviously, 12-year-olds aren't voting in town meeting, but we may need some teenagers to be doing some childcare. It would cause, so again, it depends on what your objective is.
Yeah, I know, because they're competing things. You held two very safe town meetings.
Right.
And I have high confidence that we would have a third town meeting during this pandemic very safely with no community spread from the event. So
right.
I'm not actually concerned about that, but others are. I don't see the capacity changing, so it's not as if waiting changes.
Yeah, this isn't going to be like last fall. DESI guidance for classrooms was 6 feet, and this month it's now 3 feet. I don't anticipate that the guidance coming from the state in the next 8 to 10 weeks is going to be you can change your indoor distancing, because there's no way to guarantee that those who are coming are vaccinated. I know the CDC has different guidance and suggestions for if it's 2 vaccinated adults, what you can do in proximity to each other.
So you were asking what the board thought numbers might be. Well, my answer to that is the numbers will be higher as more people are vaccinated.
I don't know. I guess I don't know motivations. This is very similar to the stipend committee's report back out, that there are some things that they can't necessarily quantify people's motivations. So I don't know that people who chose to stay away in either July or December may choose to come in May because they did or didn't have 1 or more shots, or if it's that there's something on the warrant that motivates them more and recognizes that other people may have been vaccinated.
I think it's a motivating warrant.
Yes.
And I think my impression is people are motivated by their own sense of personal safety, and those who feel safer because they're vaccinated are more likely to come. That's my feedback in terms of the question you asked about how many people did I think would show up. I think this is a great warrant that's going to drive a lot of interest in my opinion, and I think people will turn out if they feel their own decisions about their own personal safety, are satisfied. That's all I have to say.
And if I could interject, I would also want to go on record again stating, because occasionally this shows up in the social media spheres, but we don't have the option to do remote participation for an open town meeting. That's under state regulation, because we are an open town meeting. If we were a elected town meeting, they would have that option, and that worked very well for some communities. But under our current governance model as an open town meeting, we do not have the opportunity to offer people remote
The
participation.
thought went through my head, like, couldn't everybody just bring a cell phone and put their, but I remember that, no, we don't have that option. So that's all I had to say, John. Those are my thoughts on.
Gina, it's an interesting question. I brought up the same thought. When will Holliston reach a reasonable community vaccination level? We can guess that it'll be sometime in the next 2 to 3 months, but we really don't know. Right. What will that number look like? Where would it level off? If you look at large groups, companies, organizations, there's some discussions that between 30 and 40% of large entities are not taking advantage of the vaccination. They're opting out. So at some point, our vaccine number from a community perspective will plateau. When is that? I don't know. But the answer to that question is when optimally you should have town meeting. So is it worth waiting? If we're trending in the direction, what are we at right now? 28%? Put up the slide.
26%, I think.
Fully vaccinated.
Fully vaccinated.
And that's been trending up.
Right.
Right. So I guess the question we would rhetorically say is what number would that look like on May 10th? Based on what we're seeing, the greater population opens up on the 19th. April, right? That's when that's your day, right?
Front of the line.
There's another one.
I'm not front of the line.
So-
You'll be a statistic.
I'm just
So say we trend to 50% or more by May 10th, I would say that's pretty good. But should we hold out 2 weeks, a month, or whatever until we get to the plateau?
May cause some secondary challenges for facility availability because they still have school stuff that they're doing, including graduation.
That's sort of like the chicken and the egg thing. But, with respect to the decision, I feel like at this point, keeping the date is sensible, knowing what we know today. Obviously, if we have a surge or something like that, that changes. I'll tell you that I've also had conversations with Travis over the last week or two, since the ARPA numbers have sort of surfaced. The new federal stimulus numbers are, they're big, and it's a whole different program than what we've seen through CARES. We haven't received any directions yet from DLS regarding what to expect, when to expect, and what the scope is, but let's just say if it trends one way, it could have a substantial impact on the plans that Travis just went through. And it could mean that we need more time to have public input and public discussion about budgets in general. And that would be a reason to perhaps also look at a delay. That again, today we don't have the information for.
So having been down this road twice before, one thing we did start to think about 2, 3, 4 weeks out was to pull in the town moderator and just give Bill Mayer a heads up that this conversation has started. So that may be.
So I think we did that.
And the last time we had these conversations with the moderator, he essentially said, tell me where you want me to be, and I will leave the meeting. So
The moderator is very accommodating.
And he is required to be a part of the discussion to reduce quorum, but in terms of venue, as the town administrator indicated, he is extremely flexible and said, you give me a seat, you give me a warrant, I'll run the meeting.
But if we give him a 7-day window, he doesn't tend to make that decision to change the
Well,
meeting date. But,
yes.
Okay.
So at this point, I feel like we should keep the date. You think otherwise, Ben?
I don't believe we should delay it.
And I will come back to you, offline, but I'll research the numbers, I'll double check with the town clerk just to see where we've trended in the past and see if there's a correlation between number of.
I don't remember a 400.
Number of articles.
I don't remember that.
There had to have been a hot
But
button.
there was, for sure, yeah. They tend to be the outlier rather than.
Right.
Because I thought spring was closer to 200, give or take.
And that's at peak, because that's unique visitors, but not everyone stays the whole
Sure.
time.
Yeah,
Sometimes
so
people-
help us look at that.
Right.
But other than that, we'll keep with the status quo, the auditorium on the 10th.
And plans for overflow.
I think Ben asked this question, so forgive me for being repetitive, but in the event it goes to a second night,
Yes,
are the schools prepared to accept and host us that night?
yes, yeah, they've booked us for several nights as a contingency, that's normally their
I
procedure.
think you asked that, but I did, yeah, okay.
And John, on that, so we don't need to vote on this, but the consensus of the board is we will not reduce quorum.
I don't see a purpose behind it right now. I mean, the chief is indicating that our public health numbers are trending favorably, so.
Right.
Absent any deviation from that, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thanks for
Any
entertaining the
questions? Yeah, but don't go
question.
too far. I just want to make sure there's any feedback from the public, assembled on the Zoom call for, the logistics question on town meeting. Hearing none, let's move on to the warrant. Thanks, Chief. Let's move on to the warrant discussion, Travis.
Okay, so I'm going to show this list. Last week, I indicated I would send it to Chris at Holliston Reporter, so we didn't have to crop the image, and then I got home at like 11 o'clock and realized I never sent it to him, so my apologies to the Holliston Reporter. I will send it to you this evening.
Promises, promises.
Here is the list that we have been looking at. A couple small changes here is that I've added the numbers back in. Because I did not hear anything as it relates to flow that should be changed. Some of these are based on, just generally speaking, the way that the warrant flows, and I can get into that. But if we are comfortable with the numbering and the flow of this warrant, then I can certainly begin to more widely disseminate the draft of the warrant document for review, because what I'm fearing is sending it out and then having people refer to articles as number 3 that was formerly number yada, yada, yada. So, just very high level, the first 6 articles are the standard ones. The only one that I really have in there, and so in green, as you'll notice the key at the bottom here, that says potential consent agenda, if people remember. The consent agenda is a way to have town meeting vote numerous articles as a group, because they are sort of, they don't require a lot of discussion, nor will there be a lot of interest. So the authorization of the treasurer collector to sell foreclosed tax title properties is a pretty basic one. The rest of these, generally speaking, will have discussion. The report of the select board and finance committee, obviously, compensation of elected officials will include that stipend conversation. Unpaid bills and current fiscal year transfers has money, and therefore I would not put it in the consent agenda. The next grouping are all bylaw related, but interestingly enough, we have 2 citizens petitions which always go at the bottom of the warrant that are also bylaw related. The consolidated personnel bylaw is the standard one that we have to set the wage classification plan. Mayor and I have this updated and ready to go. We also have a consolidated personnel bylaw that was recommended by our labor council to adjust 2 things. 1, sick accrual, and 2, the probationary period. I would not consider these to be, of great discussion, but at the same point, as they are changed, I would not put them in the consent agenda. Number 9 and 10 is where the governance committee articles are. Those are available through the website. If you go through the governance committee, they're available on the left side of the page for the governance committee. They have made a couple recent changes, which we discussed last week, and those are also now on the website. The non-substantive numbering of general bylaws, which would be for the clerks to be able to change numbers of bylaws that don't actually impact anything, I would consider that to be not requiring much discussion, and I would consider that to be in the consent agenda. 12 and 13 additionally are just ones that we need to do. 14, 15, 16, 14 and 15 are the general Board of Assessors articles. 16 is a new one this year that just adds 22H and G to the veteran tax exemption. Because it's new, we could consider whether or not it should go in the consent agenda, although I will say when you read through that language, I don't consider it to require very much discussion.
By the way, just because it might be in the consent agenda doesn't limit the conversation or questions that might go into those.
That's true.
It's just streamlining it captures all of them at the same time. Good.
Absolutely. 17 revolving funds, spending limits, again, we're not necessarily appropriating money, we're setting limits for funds that must support themselves. The omnibus budget at 18, obviously, we get into from here on, nothing necessarily for the consent agenda. That article is the standard omnibus. The transfer from available funds to CapEx, that is 1920 capital expenditure budget. I'll go into in a second. I have that, and we just had a discussion at 4 o'clock today with the capital subcommittee. And the major difference there from the last iteration we had seen is obviously the street sweeper conversation, which I think we've had enough of this evening. The report of the Community Preservation Committee, I had a conversation with Frank Chamberlain. He'll be getting me his final numbers. The town accountant provided me the sort of backup documentation, but his votes will need to go in. That should be coming shortly. Transfer from available funds to stabilization. This is one that we keep on here. At the moment, there's nothing on the certificate of appropriation draft that would put money into stabilization. Although one of the conversations that we've had about is potentially the money that was put in from overlay within FY21, potentially being seed money in Article 23, the pension liability. At the same point, Mary Bosquet, Sharon Emmerich, and myself have sort of discussed the idea of if we're not going to backfill the stabilization fund at the May town meeting, we are concerned of moving that money from the general stabilization to the new pension liability stabilization fund, which I'll discuss in a moment, and reducing that amount strictly for an S&P standpoint. Sorry, go ahead.
Question on item number 22. In the event that there are no funds to transfer, does the item need to still be in the warrant, or would we be striking that before printing?
Normally I would leave it and have no action, but in a year where we want to be removing, we could certainly discuss simply removing.
Or we could throw it into the consent.
Or we could throw it in.
Okay, thanks. Keep going, Travis.
All right, so 23, 24, 25, these are the ones that this language is language that I've discussed with liaisons for these items. But I think at this point, we're in the discussion of the broader discussion of the warrant, the need for these articles. So the establishment of the stabilization for the pension liability was something that was pitched by Mary Bosquet last year. It was removed before what ended up being the July town meeting. And essentially what it's looking at is, obviously, we have our OPEB liability, which the town has been aggressive in funding. We also have pension liabilities. We have two separate ones. The teachers pay into the Mass Teachers Retirement System, and then non-teachers pay into the Middlesex retirement system. Each of those systems have different levels of unfunded liability. We are legally obligated in different ways to handle those. For the Middlesex retirement system specifically, every 2 years we have there's an actuarial calculation, and we get a new we're legally obligated to follow an actuarial report that comes out, and those are going to increase as we get to what is going to be the statutory date to make sure that we are fully funded for our pension liability. As Mary Bosquet did quite a bit of homework last year before I came into town, discussed a number of options, and this came out of conversations with S&P and others. If we set up the stabilization fund in this particular way, we would actually be able to take any funds we have in this system and invest it in the same vehicle that we invest our OPEB trust fund in. It would not act as a trust fund. It would act as a stabilization fund, but because of the purpose specific to pension, we could invest it in the PRIT fund, which is what our OPEB funds are in. Some of the conversation I had with the liaisons was sort of making sure that the money could not be repurposed towards something else in the future, sort of willy-nilly. And I think, through what we've sort of looked at here, Mary and I, is that it would be the mechanism of putting it specifically in PRIT, jumping through the hoops to get it into that particular funding, that would identify this as specific to the pension liability. Now, it wouldn't work like an OPEB trust because a trust fund is specifically set up to, in the future, take money in and also pay money out, right? So the pension system for Middlesex, an employee pays part of their salary into that system, and the town contributes money into that system, and then the Middlesex retirement system actually pays out the benefit of the pension to a retiree. That is theoretically how an OPEB trust will operate in the future. That's how GASB has it set up, although nobody is at that point right now. This pension liability stabilization fund would really be to protect the town, as we know that the legally obligated contributions to the retirement system are going to increase as we get towards 2035, 2037, which is when PARAC, the state's overseeing body of all pension systems, is going to stop allowing people to extend out their contribution schedule and make you be funded by. So as we approach the next decade, there is going to be an acceleration of the town needing to contribute to the system legally. And that's removing MTRS as that has a separate process. Although the MTRS system is also not well funded, I would say, is not 60% funded, but is a little bit of a separate conversation. So the idea behind this fund would be simply to protect the town in future budget cycles, to have a fund. We could invest it specifically because of the fact that the nature of it is pension. We've had all of those discussions and have this fund. So the idea in the FY22, as we get to the May town meeting, will be to use the $45,000 that's left in the budget from this year. When we prepay or we pay in the beginning of the year to Middlesex, we get a small percent that we essentially are not required to put in. At the end of the year, we generally do put it in, so it goes towards our liability. The idea would be to use that as seed money to start this fund. Additionally, in December, we moved the overlay release into stabilization and clearly wrote the intention is most likely going to be to put it into a future pension liability fund. Again, as I said, I think October would probably be a better time to do that so that we're not reducing our general liability fund and making an error as it relates to how S&P calculates our reserves. And then moving forward into FY23 and beyond, begin to have, what is probably going to be a relatively less aggressive funding schedule because that liability sort of looks different than OPEB. But then, we'd essentially have plans as it relates to all of our major liabilities. We've seen our debt substantially decline, and we're going to have a plan before we are accruing significantly more debt. We obviously have the plan as it relates to the OPEB, and then this would be the plan as it relates to the pension liability. So that's a lot of words, and obviously the description and the comments that would be related can be tweaked to sort of cover the majority of what I just said. But if there's any comments on the sort of content of what I just
The only thing I had was, if I recall correctly, that stabilization account was recommended by our bond council during our bond hearing.
Yes.
I think they brought forth the need for that kind of a call-out, but,
I think it would be an excellent step for the town as it relates to our bond rating.
Yeah, one quick question about that. And I already think I know the answer, but I just want to make sure, verify. Because we're investing it in a different vehicle, and this is a stabilization fund, we don't need special legislation the way we do with the OPEB trust. We can just create the stabilization fund on our own, correct?
No. So the special legislation as it related to the OPEB fund was because of the nature of some of the things that were the way the town wanted to handle that. We do not need special legislation to invest this in the PRIT fund, although that was something that was discussed by the liaisons specifically because of the idea that they want to make sure that this is not repurposed in the future.
Right.
As Mary and I discussed it and went through it, my belief is that by coupling this with the process of getting it in PRIT, or PRIM is the management of PRIT, which is the trust.
Sure.
That we are making it very clear, and it would require quite a bit of decoupling ever in the future to make it for any other purpose than pension. So I'm satisfied that it is very clearly for this purpose.
Right.
That
because it's a pension.
The purpose is pension.
It can go into PRIT, and therefore, if it was repurposed for anything else, it would not be able to be in PRIT.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Because a general stabilization fund cannot be invested in the market the way that these types of funds can. Right, that's the difference, right? We end up in money markets, we end up in things that do not have significant return.
Because it's a long-term liability as opposed to a stabilization fund which has a short-term potential.
Exactly.
I'm all set.
Tina, any questions?
Yeah, a couple questions. So I'm just going to summarize what you said, and then I have a question for you about our financial policies. So you're saying that this May we would look to put about $50,000 into this stabilization fund for the pension. Then you're saying that in October we'd look to take the overlay that was appropriated in December and move that into this.
If we were able to backfill it, I would not want, ideally, the general stabilization fund balance to decrease. So if we were able to, in the fall, be in position to make sure that the general stabilization fund balance was not decreasing, then I would think that moving the 484 from overlay to this fund would set us up to be in the 500,000 plus as a starting balance within this fiscal year of this fund. I think that would be an excellent sort of sign to make towards S&P, that we understand the significance of this liability, taking it very seriously, and yeah.
I remember the hard work that Mary did last July to prepare this, and I'm glad we're coming back to it. I think this is a really good step forward. So 2 more questions here. Future years, then, you would look to, because we do not have a policy in our financial policies about funding this, what would be this new pension fund. So we'd have to create that policy. Would you look to use free cash and only free cash? Would you look to use all of free cash? Like, how would you see that going?
I don't know that, quite honestly, I would back ourselves into that.
You wouldn't add that this fund will be funded by free cash, appropriations for free cash?
No, but I also would not preclude us from using free cash. But, you know, theoretically, and then for a number of these things, right, and the dollar amount is different than some of the other liabilities we've looked at here. But if you build in, right, we have in the budget for benefits, the contribution to the Middlesex retirement system, you know, you could essentially increase that amount or make it very evident that it's separate and going into a pension liability fund. And we would be able to potentially, you know, offset that in certain ways through the other liabilities that we have, that we would then begin to sort of show that we have a plan for all of our liabilities holistically.
I love that idea, and I look forward to seeing that in our financial policies. Last question. Did you say, I might have misunderstood you, did you say that the Middlesex Retirement Pension Fund will need to be fully funded by 2035?
So the way that, and as I said, I was the previous administrator of the Danvers Retirement System, so I've been through this quite a bit. The legal, you cannot have a funding schedule beyond 2040. That's what the law says.
Okay.
I believe the last time I checked, there was nobody without one beyond 2037. And then the guidance from PARAC was, we'd really like to see everybody get to a funding schedule of 2035.
Okay. Thank you.
Travis, I don't think you've gone through the remaining articles. Is there anything else you want to highlight?
No, so I'll just, so the other two in this grouping, the revolving fund for the recycling center, or for recycling in general, this is one I think we've discussed quite a bit, but, you know, there are 3 major revenue components of the solar at Marshall. The 2 biggest ones being the pilot and the lease. Those are intended to go to the general fund. There is a smaller revenue component that will fluctuate based on the amount of output of the system there, which would be in the $50,000 to $70,000 per year range. The idea would be to have that as a funding source for a revolving fund that would support essentially the recycling center and any future sort of programs that could be done there, but also our recycling as a service throughout town. We're going to have continuous issues through that. So within, it will show specifically what revenues would be going into this revolving fund. It would show specifically what type of use could be used for those funds. But I think in the long run, by looking at our recycling center specifically and the services that are provided there, increasing service would be one of our biggest goals. And then, you know, some of the products that, some of the projects, that specifically come from our sustainability coordinator would essentially allow us to look at what is being offered, have a funding source for some of those items that are within this category, and potentially at some point in the future, depending on the finances, be able to build in that position into the revolving fund and take it out of the general fund. The other, establishing the revolving fund, this one I would put under the category of if you build it, they will come. We are looking at a number of EV charging grant opportunities. It's not necessarily an issue of will we be able to find a grant opportunity to put EV charging stations elsewhere in town. It's going to be an issue of which grant opportunity we pursue. But all of those grant opportunities seem to be coming to the realization that we've come to, which is we add more EV charging stations around town. It can't be like the one out back that the electricity is charged to the town, but that's obviously just 2 units. We'd be looking for potentially more units, and it would need to require the ability for a user to come up, use a credit card, charge their car, and then they would be covering the cost. We would then, and I've looked at a few towns, need to set the rate based on a number of factors. Some people are supplementing the rate. Some people are capturing everything that you need through that rate, which includes the depreciation of the assets that you can, replace in the future. If we don't have the revolving fund set up when we get into that instance, we're going to have to do quite a bit of juggling to try to get that done through the general fund to the point where it may actually kill our ability to pursue any of those. So I think setting up the revolving fund is going to put us in position to have those conversations, and to not have that conversation now would be, I think, probably opportunity missed. I won't get in specifically to the 26 through 29. These are all planning board or zoning board of appeals related. As you see here mentioned in red, there was a public hearing as it relates to number 26 on April 12th. That was this evening. That has been continued to next Tuesday, the 20th. The rest of these have been either voted on or have public hearings for the planning department coming up. These all have costs associated with it, so I can get into those if you'd like. And then the last three are specifically citizens petitions. You heard Mary Greendale on number 35. Number 36 and number 37 will be, if motions are made by the citizens petitioners on town meeting floor. So I have the information that was provided from them. So I'd be happy to get into 30 through 34, but I understand it's also 9 o'clock, so I'll leave that up to the chair.
Let's look at it really briefly, rather than looking at the articles. Let's turn to the cost page, Travis. I don't know if Chris has that put up on the screen.
Are you talking about the capital or
Yep.
the capital?
Yep. Cost. Yep, there you go. Thanks. I'm guessing you're still carrying that street sweeper, right, for October?
I moved it to October just so it doesn't fall off the radar.
Based on what we see, you're recommending a CapEx number of $18,941, correct? Off the top. I think you said early on the CapEx number that you were projecting to fund for FY22 is $1,800, correct?
So if you add up everything in this capital list here in the May 21 column, with a sort of late addition as needed at 1750 here in yellow, and then a swap of the smaller vehicle on the highway to number 2 priority, and moving the sweeper to October to potentially be removed.
Sorry.
You come to a bottom line.
What I'm trying to say is you're funding tax-supported articles.
Oh, I'm sorry.
At 1850, right?
Right, 1,850,000. Yep.
Okay, so that's where I wanted to go. So with that number, along with the projected items that are in the capital spending projected for May and October, you're short by about $692,000, which you show coming from a couple of different other locations. Is that correct?
Right. So
with some raise and appropriate, this is free cash, right?
No. So raise and appropriate are actually the 3 articles that I can get into in a second. The Blair Square would be through taxation. The $45,000 would be for the construction documents at Blair Square. They would then take those construction documents and approach the CPC towards October. The 9 Green Street demolition, again, raise and appropriate tax dollars would be $118,500. The public safety signs and equipment would be through a previous balance of a warrant article, so the funding source is other. And then the feasibility study for the DPW, $75,000, would also be taxation. So if I go back to this list, or excuse me, if I go back to the 1.85 million, essentially, if you remove the $238,500 from the 1.85, you come to about $1.6 million, which would be available to go into the capital expenditure fund. Then out of the capital expenditure fund would be this $431,000, which is everything above here, with the exception of the warrant articles I just discussed. So this list would lead to $431,000 coming out of the capital expenditure fund for these purposes, provided that everybody agrees with this list, which we can get into, with $1.6 million going in for a net increase of the capital expenditure fund of over $1 million.
Now, your free cash projection here is $141,000. Is that correct?
My free free cash projection. Those are ones that I would say would be coming out of free cash, but I would expect the free cash number to be higher than that.
Much higher.
It would be higher, yeah.
And in any event, we had no change to the profile of items for fall town meeting spending. Where would that free cash availability go?
Potentially a few places, probably, the capital expenditure fund, depending on how much of this list is planned for in October. Some of these items may come off, like the sweeper conversation we had. Additionally, free cash could be used, into a number of items, directly into capital items or, into the CapEx fund, general stabilization fund, and potentially this new, pension liability fund.
And just briefly, in the last few years, our free cash number has been about what amount? Sorry,
$2 million plus?
that's not shown anywhere on here.
I'm not projecting a free cash number on the sheet, no.
So it's strictly a windfall. When it hits, we don't currently have any projected costs that would hit against that.
No, I think the,
$40,000.
I think the point here would be, we have essentially between May and October, potentially $2 million in CapEx coming out. In May, we're looking at an increase of that balance by $1 million and knocking off the October list. And so if we were to assume no free cash in the fall, then we would be using CapEx to address our capital. That would be essentially the reality.
But with that traditional free cash number, where would that leave us?
I think we'd be in good position to do all of our capital work while maintaining at least the balance that we have in the CapEx fund now or increasing.
Excellent. Any questions on this, Matt?
No.
Tina? Nice work, Travis. Looks great. Just outstanding work. Any questions on the Zoom call relative to the warrant discussion for the FY22 budget? Okay, the only other thing that's sort of lingering, Travis, is when our board should be considering votes on these various articles. Do you have a recommendation for us?
So I would say, first of all, is everybody comfortable with this numbering? Because to change the numbering in the future can be problematic.
I've heard that. Yeah.
I've heard sometimes you can use letters and a variety of other items. But if we keep the numbering, if people are comfortable with this, then I'm prepared to sort of finalize. I had a first run through with town council, so I'm prepared to sort of spread this more widely, provided that, we think the numbers won't change.
Right.
And at that point, I'd be happy to entertain votes or bring back any information on any of these items. And then as you review the comments, a number of these will have, select board specific comments under them. Make sure that you're comfortable with that language.
Any thoughts on that approach?
Two. One is, the consent agenda will drop it. If we go with what you have highlighted in green, we'll drop it to 29 votes from town meeting, potentially.
I think the consent agenda requires a vote to have the consent agenda and then a vote on the consent agenda, so that's 2 votes, but no.
And then and I say this because we were talking about 2 nights of town meeting, and I just want to hold out the things that would drive a second night potentially. I mean, I know anything can in the end, but practically, the number of warrant articles is one of those things. The second that I would say is in number 18, Article 18, the 2021 budget. We have talked about the not abbreviated form, but the more efficient way of presenting the budget to town meeting, where you just have 2 line items for each budget presented. Where are you in leaning one way or the other on that?
So the way that the budget spreadsheet that goes to the finance committee and the select board, and sort of all the department heads at the beginning of the year, Sharon had from the beginning added the column, I believe it's called moderator now, which would roll up the budget to those 2 rather than 4 categories, right? So when the moderator reads the budget, it could be read in 2 categories per budget, right? You're still looking at, you're probably going from the 25 minutes it took Mr. Mayor to read to 15 or 10, but, it should cut down a substantial amount of time. Now, at the end of the day, if that leads to questions or there's feedback on any of these lines, that 15 minutes can be eaten up pretty quickly through public comment, but I would hope that saves some time in presentation and certainly saves us time at the end of the year when it comes to line item transfers.
I just haven't heard that yet introduced to the finance committee for their consideration.
Sure, I can bring that up tomorrow.
Thank you. That was it, John.
I think I may have had that conversation quite a while ago, and didn't get any feedback, but I can show it, to make sure that everybody is clear on it.
In the event that you find that the volume of work the board will encounter when it comes to approving the articles for the warrant, should or could reside outside our normal meeting schedule, just let me know, we can post for a separate meeting. Do you think it's valuable to just handle this particular piece of work?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, right, we have the 20th, as our next meeting. So, you know, so voting this as a whole, at the moment, we did not open to remove the one on the bottom here. Oh, I'm not showing it anymore, but the one on the bottom that was originally sort of introduced and determined by council to not be needed. So we'll need to open it to remove, at the very least, that, right? If there are no other changes when we do that, we'll close the warrant again, finalize it. But at the end of the day, you know, the first draft that's been out, that's gone through council, I will try to finalize the comments and then have it in a version that can be shared. At the end of the day, if you have any comments on any of these that you're uncomfortable with, otherwise, you know, I think we can vote as a package next week, if everybody's comfortable with that.
We sign it, what, 7 days ahead or 10 days ahead, or what is it?
7 days is the minimum. Obviously, what we'd like to do is post it with enough time for it to be reviewed, and then I would start to work with the Finance Committee on the Finance Committee's report part, and then Mary, Sharon, and I we'll be working on quite a bit of the background information that goes in there, the financial sort of pages, and yeah. But 7 is the
Just sort of thinking like, you know, when are we gonna sign it?
Yeah, so I would say on the 20th, if everybody feels like it's in good condition, that would be great. And if it's not, then to the chair's point, we could look at another meeting, or something like that. That is the week that, at the moment, I don't believe the Finance Committee is set to meet that week at all because it's school vacation week. So if we need to have a special meeting or anything like that, I mean, I'll leave that up to the board.
We don't take school vacation at all. Almost a working board. There you go. Got it. Any comments from those folks on the Zoom call relative to the warrant discussion this evening? Hearing none, let's move on. Board business. Let's start with well number 5, contract award. Place this in your world, Charles.
You have this, hold on. Okay. So, I will, make a motion to authorize the town administrator to execute the contract for well number 5 with Robert B. Our Company Incorporated in the amount of $8,175,285, which is within the original borrowing authorization.
I will second that.
With a comment, Travis, a little bit of background on what this item appropriates for?
So the water treatment plant at well number 5, had gone through an original appropriation borrowing authorization of $8,375,000. Additionally, there was $600,000 appropriated through water retained earnings for the design engineering, which was done by Ali Paran of AP Associates. And most recently, $800,000 was approved, should that be needed when the bids came in. The bid of roughly $8.1 million that Mr. Sparrow just read is within the original appropriation, the borrowing authorization, to move forward on the timeline that had been most previously discussed, which would be for this work to be done over the next year, and water flowing out of the well number 5 facility in summer 22.
In fact, this is the water treatment plant.
This is.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Thank you, Travis. And I presume this information will make its way to the website where folks have been tracking the progress on this project. Thank you. Next item, Ben, this is the Chapter 90 request.
I'm gonna move to authorize the town administrator to submit to MassDOT the Chapter 90 request form for Exchange, School, Spring, Pleasant, Mechanic, and Union Streets.
The motion of a second.
I will second that.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carries. We have an appointment to the Agricultural Commission.
I will make a motion to appoint Evan Reseska to the Agricultural Commission for a term ending June 30th, 2023.
And I will second that, and thank you, Evan, for volunteering.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Any other business? Beth? Nope. Tina?
No.
I do not.
I have one item. I
Please, go
apologize.
ahead.
It should have been under TA update, but, Highmark Provision, which had come to the board previously to request, a host community agreement on Summer Street, released a had a press release through the Holliston Reporter that mistakenly referenced the word retail instead of cultivation. The Holliston Reporter has corrected that, if you go on their website now, but it did lead to quite a bit of questions. So I just wanted to assure everybody that, it was simply a typo and, not any type of bait and switch. The word retail was removed, and the word is, cultivation, and they have been very, pleasant to work with our council, having reached out to their council to make progress towards the HCA, which has been previously discussed.
Thank you very much. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. That's it. Holliston. It is now 9:20. We hope you have a pleasant week. We'll see you next week. Enjoy the long weekend. Good night.
Tuesday.